Welcome to the podcast, People More Interesting Than Me. I'm your host, Michael Strumsky. Today's guest is the best-selling author of Drinking and Knowing Things. He's a certified sommelier with the Guild of Master Sommeliers, a certified specialist of wine, and a Master of Wines candidate with the Institute of Masters of Wine. He runs the wildly popular Drinking and Knowing Things wine blog, which was adapted into a book that provides 52 specific wine recommendations. He is the founder of the Bhutan Wine Company and is leading the development of the wine industry in the magical Himalayancountry. He owns the award-winning SoCal Rum company. Michael is a professor at the Merage School of Business at the University of California, Irvine. He lives in SoCal, where he spends his time blind tasting and doing extreme sports. Enjoy. Today I have with me is Michael Juergens, and the question I was going to ask you, and after my amazing intro of you, sir, do you think that's why you have just gone expansive with your interests? As I just listed, all the things that you have your hands into, racing, wine, you have your own blog, your own book.
Let's just go deep right from the get-go. But I think I was always curious about stuff. And then I ended up getting a little caught up in the corporate world and chasing the big corporate money. And, I'm a partner in a big firm and all this stuff. And in the middle of that, I went through a super, super gnarly divorce that lasted 13 years. Yeah, 13 years. I hold the record for one of the longest divorces in Orange County history. And through that process, I had to do a lot of soul searching, right? And at the end of it, what I concluded was that you get one trip, you get one ride on the merry-go-round. That's it. And so really what makes me happy is doing epic shit with cool people, more so than money or anything else. Like, have the best fucking stories of anybody in your friend group. Go do that stuff. And so I adopted that mantra for my life. This is probably maybe 15 years ago now, where I just said, look, I'm going to measure everything with that yardstick. Epic shit, cool people. If it's not both, I don't want to do it. And it was kind of a little bit like that movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey. Remember that?
Yeah.
Where I just started to go like, all right, you want to go to Antarctica and run a marathon? Yep. You want to go diving with great white sharks? Yep. That sounds epic. With cool people, let's go. And so when I started doing that, every piece of my life became better. I became more successful in every aspect of my life, and I ended up having these amazing experiences. And so I think that's kind of what allowed me to transfer just being curious about stuff to actually doing this sort of range of different shit that I did. And yeah, probably not for everybody, but it works for me. And
Yeah. So I have a kid, and when I see him do stuff, it's just like something that fascinates him just would bore me to death. But in your retrospect, do you see like with your serotonin intake, do you keep on trying to top to the next one? Like, he's building blocks, but maybe in like 20 years he's skydiving because he's at that level. Do you escalate? That's my main question.
I definitely escalate. Yeah, I'm like the heroin addict looking for the bigger high. I want to jump out of a higher airplane or, do something that's even more, risky. So I do, but I think it's less about the serotonin. I don't know, actually, that's a good question. But what I believe it is for me is this idea of trying to find the best version of myself. And, I was running marathons in cities, and then I realized like, wow, there's not a lot of risk. There's a medical tent every quarter mile, and there's lots of people there. Like, you're not really pushing yourself to the limits here. Let's go run some marathons or go run some ultra marathons in some places that don't have safety nets and see what happens. See how far you can push yourself and what you're actually capable of doing. And so that's kind of what I try to do is like, what else am I capable of? Let's go see. As opposed to that I get a high off it. Although I do get a high off it. I'll be honest. Like I do. But I don't know that that's the driving motivation behind why.
So tell me a little bit. I had never heard about this. They actually have marathons in Antarctica.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we
What's that like?
They have there's a bunch of islands around Antarctica. So they do a couple marathons on some of the islands. What we did was we flew by the way, Antarctica is big. It's like the size of fucking Australia. We flew a jet all the way into the interior of Australia and landed on the Union Glacier, which is about 12 miles long, which is terrifying, by the way, because the jet lands and you just kind of skid around, but there's nothing to hit. So you just kind of skid and like it's crazy. And then you jump out and you run a marathon. It was like negative 50 degrees and 50-mile-an-hour winds. And I almost died. I got lost. And we ended up snowed in tents for 5 days because the weather was too intense for people to come get us out. But yeah, like when you go through something like that, and I remember there was one point in the race, right, probably about mile 20, where I was lost. It was the middle of a blizzard. I couldn't see more than about 2 feet in front of me. I was freezing. And they had told us that in the safety briefing, they're like, as long as everything hurts, you're good. When stuff starts going numb, that's when you need to start to worry. And I was starting to go numb all over, and I had sweated in my balaclava, and then it had frozen to my head, which was not cool. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, I'm going to die. There's a very real chance I am going to die right now. And there's no cell service. You can't call for help. There's no, safety tent every mile. It's you, and it's time to do or die. Literally do or die. And so I was lost in this blizzard on this glacier, and I'm screaming at the universe like, I'm not going out like this, just finding like anger to try to fuel me to get out of it. And I was able to push through it and get out of it and get to the end. And actually, funny story. So I get to the end of the race finally, and I run across the finish line. And I'm way later than everybody else. Like there's only like 30 people that did this, and most of them had already finished. And I run across the finish line, and I fall down on the ground, and I'm laying on this glacier, and I'm just sobbing uncontrollably, just crying. And the race director comes over to me, and he stands over me. I'm laying on the ground, and he goes, dude, we screwed up. We weren't watching when you came through. We didn't get your photo. Do you want to get up and run back through so we could get a photo? And I'm laying on the ground crying. And I go, no, I don't. I can't do it. And he looks at me and he goes, and he's wearing this big furry hat. And I just remember, like, he's standing over me with this furry hat. And he goes, well, don't you want your photo? And I was like, God damn it, I do want my photo. So I pulled myself up and I stumbled across the finish line the other direction for about 2 feet. And then I turned it and I just stumbled through, and I have this picture of me like stumbling across the finish line in a blizzard. So I got my photo. But yeah, good time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about your true passion, wine. So when I was reading it, and I thought this is what the number one thing my audience is going to ask once we bring this up, Master of Wine. What's the difference between Master of Wine and a sommelier?
I get asked that question quite a bit. So in the wine world, there are two professional certification tracks for the industry. One is a sommelier track, and one is what's called WSET. The sommelier track consists of 4 levels. You could be a level 1, level 2, level 3, or a master sommelier. There's about 400 master somms in the world. Sommeliers, and by the way, I am also a level 2 sommelier. Okay. But sommeliers, for the most part, that professional track is designated to teach you how to serve wine in restaurants. Mm-hmm. You serve tables, you pair wine with food, you talk about the aromatics of the wine. I don't want to work in a restaurant. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not what I'm interested in. And then the WSET track, which culminates in a Master of Wine designation. There's about 400 Masters of Wine in the world too. is much more focused on like the business of wine and all of the aspects of growing grapes and making wine and selling wine and marketing and so on and so forth. So that to me is more interesting. I started on the sommelier track, and then I realized kind of early on, like, this isn't for me. Let me jump over and change tracks. And so I've been doing that for, I don't know, about 8 years now. There's more astronauts in the United States than are masters of wine. There's only like 60 masters of wine in the US. So it's not a trivial thing to do, but it's one of those super douchey esoteric certifications that the only people that care about it are the people that care about it. Nobody else does. But I'm working on it. We'll see.
No, I mean, the way you've explained it, it's basically from, it's probably past farm to table. Basically, you're taking the life of the grape to the very end when it gets consumed, or even past consumption. Basically, what, 50, 60, because some bottles go for how many, what's like the oldest bottle of wine that's ever been drank? That was actually good, I guess.
Ever. The oldest bottle of wine I've ever drank was an 1840 Madeira, which I drank about 2 years ago. So at the time, it was about 180 years old. And it was delicious, by the way. The most expensive bottle of wine I ever drank was Burgundy that was about $30,000 a bottle. But there are more expensive bottles than that for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, you can spend a ton of money on wine. But you don't have to. I mean, the price of wine is often correlated with quality. But the price of wine is truly a function of supply and demand. Most of the wine I drink, like this wine I'm drinking right now, is a Gamay from New Zealand. It's delicious, and it was like $22. So if you kind of know what you're doing and you can avoid the supply and demand imbalances, you can drink great stuff for not a lot of money.
Yeah, that's great. And I knew you have a white rum distillery, but do you have your own winery?
I do. So I started the wine industry in the Kingdom of Bhutan in the Himalayas. And so I have 9 vineyards there. And we've been working on the project for about 7 or 8 years. We'll probably make our first wine in 2024.
Okay. And I guess that's huge, right? That's like the, not the Super Bowl, but that's like your debutante ball, right? That's like your first coming out with it.
Well, so the last time that a country that didn't have grapes built a wine industry, I think, was New Zealand in the 1800s. So this has not been done in the world in 200 years. So yeah, it's debutante ball of it's a big coming out party. They're actually filming a documentary. It's that kind of big of a deal.
Awesome.
Actually, I don't know if you can see, I'm wearing my Bhutan Wine t-shirt.
I like it. So it's not even like a debutante ball. It's like the first debutante ball in the country.
Yeah, correct. It's been a really neat project, and just because of the uniqueness of it, and because of my global wine network, there's been a lot of attention being paid to this. I mean, I've done interviews all over the world from wine people that are like, "Wait, you're making wine in the Himalayas? What the hell? Tell me about it." So it's a cool thing.
Well, that's going to be awesome because I mean, like, do you know the monasteries in Greece? It's Meteora, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And the reason I bought a bottle there just because it was made by monks, but now you have one wine bottle made in the Himalayas. You know what I mean? Like,
actually, you want to know a cool monk story?
Sure. Hit me with the monk story.
When in the Kingdom of Bhutan, it is tradition that when a baby is born, you take it to the monastery, and there are special monks who name the baby. And they give the baby a first name and a second name. And so you can't tell who's related to anybody because nobody has the same last names, because the monks just give them whatever second name they get. And so when we were thinking about the branding for our winery, I said, hey, let's have the monk's name. Let's have them name our baby. And so I go to the master namer monk of the country and I go, hey, we got this wine baby. Can you name it? He goes, sure. So about 6 weeks later, he comes back and he goes, all right, the name of your winery is Cerkem, Serkem, Cerkem. And I go, okay, does it have a meaning? And he goes, yeah. In the Buddhist religion, when you visit a monastery, it's customary to bring an offering for the gods. An offering could be food, or it could be booze, or it could be cash, or it could be whatever. If it's alcohol, the offering is called Cerkem, and it is the alcohol of the gods. So
That's awesome.
That's the name of my winery, Cerkem.
So are you doing a similar type thing for like each of the wines? Or is that not a thing? You don't name the wines, they're just the type of.
Well, so it depends on who you are. Some wineries name each one of their wines individually. Other, like Orange Swift is a good example. They have Papillon and they have 7 vineyards, or each wine has a different name. Mm-hmm. For us, I think we're going to stick with the branding of Cerkem, but it'll be like Cerkem Cabernet, Cerkem Pinot Noir, Cerkem Chardonnay, whatever the different grape varieties are. Probably. All this is, we're figuring it out, right? So nothing's set in stone at this point, but my guess is that we'll stick with Cerkem. And it's a cool story, like the alcohol of the gods, like named by the master namer monks in the monasteries of the Himalayas. Like, here's the alcohol of Cerkem. Yeah. Like, how cool is that?
It's just like, obviously people are going to buy it just for the sake of trying it. You know what I mean? Like the second best part is that it will taste amazing and it'll get you past the first bottle. Like they'll be like, oh, let's get more bottles of this.
That would be my hope. Well, I bet a lot of time and money that the wine is going to be good, but we don't know yet. Like we're figuring it out. But I will say, so I just got back from Bhutan about a week ago, and the country was on lockdown for like most of the pandemic. So I had not been there since February of 2020. It was the first time I had gotten to go back in like 2.5 years. And I brought a small group of people with me, including some of the investors in the company. And at one point we went to the Punaka Valley. They have like this 1/4-mile long suspension bridge, which is sketchy as fuck, but it's cool to walk across. And so I took people there to walk across the suspension bridge. And so we're walking across the suspension bridge, and there's a dude sitting at the end of the suspension bridge with a bucket full of guavas. And he's selling guavas. And he goes, here, you guys want some guavas? And we're like, yeah, we'll buy some guavas. So we buy a handful of guavas. And everyone starts eating the guavas. And people are like, holy shit, this is the best guava I've ever had in my life. And I go, that's our business model right there. Bhutan has, as the only carbon negative country on the planet, they grow some of these most amazing crops ever in weird verticals like guava. Like when was the last time you ate a guava? I was like, holy cow. I mean, wax poetic about a guava. Like, you just don't. And so I'm like, if you can grow the world's best guava, you've got to be able to grow some really interesting wineries. And that's what we bet a ton of money and time on.
Well,
jury's out. We'll let you know in 2024 if I was right or if I was wrong.
So why is it so far away? It takes 2 to 3 years just for like a first batch?
Yeah, when you plant a grapevine, it takes 3 to 5 years for the vine to start producing grapes. And so we had to, first off, it's the only carbon negative country on the planet. And so you can't just like show up with a suitcase full of invasive species and start planting shit in the ground. So I had to work with the country to get them excited about the art of the possible for wineries. So that took a little while. And then we had to find spots. And Bhutan has a lot of different altitude. Like the bottom end of the country is like 500 feet in altitude. And the top is like 27,000 feet in altitude. But that span is like 300 miles. So it's basically, it just goes straight up. So we had to find different spots. And then we weren't sure what grape varieties were going to work. So we had to plant a bunch of different grape varieties at a bunch of different levels, and not everything's working. And so it's just taken us a little while to figure stuff out. But we're getting pretty close. And we had a lot of good grapes this year. And I think next year is going to be even better. And then 2024 is probably going to be big.
Yeah,
the debutante ball.
The debutante ball. And I can't even imagine the logistics of getting it from point A to, I don't know, wherever your main distribution hub is. The logistics, imports, that must have been crazy.
Yeah, the good news on the export side is you can the port of Kolkata in India is about a 12-hour drive. So you can just drive down the hill. What's that?
That's not too bad, then.
No, not too bad. And I mean, and Kolkata is a industrial port city. So I can ship out. What's more difficult is within the country, trying to get over the mountains, because our vineyards are all over the place. And so what we determined just on this last trip is we were going to build a single production facility. I think we're going to need to build multiple, because the west and the east are separated by an 18-hour drive over a really sketchy road that rains in the summer. And inevitably there's avalanches that kill people every year.
Okay.
And so I don't want to be trying to drive truckloads of grapes over that pass.
Yeah, you can lose the harvest, right?
Correct. Yep. So what we'll probably need to do is have a bunch of different smaller scale production facilities where we're making smaller batches, and then we consolidate wine, probably down in the south by the Indian border, where we can ship it out to Kolkata pretty easily. Yeah, lots of interesting challenges. Here's another challenge. Check this out. So in the south of Bhutan, it's very hot.
Mm-hmm.
And it rains like crazy in the summertime. So we had sort of written that off as like, this is not a viable place to go grow grapes. But we started talking, we said, hey, we could use some advanced farming techniques because it's so hot there, we can make the grapes go dormant in the summertime and then have them grow in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
And then we harvest in the springtime, which is awesome because you can then get 2 harvests a year. You get a harvest in the fall with the regular stuff and a harvest in the spring with the other stuff. And so, like, we should try this and see if it works. So we planted a bunch of grapes down there, and we started growing them. And I'm on our weekly call with our viticulture team, and I go, hey, how are the grapes doing in Gellifen? This was literally like a week and a half. And our viticulturist that's in the country is like, oh man, the grapes are doing great, but I think we're gonna have an elephant problem. So I go, an elephant problem? Like, what's the problem? He goes, well, the elephants are like just tromping around down there, and we think they're gonna trample down the vineyards. And I go, wow, okay. I don't know what to do about that.
I've never had an elephant problem.
Then not a lot of technical grape expertise on how to manage the elephant and the vineyard problem. Like, you can't spray for elephants, you can't build a fence. Like, Napa doesn't have an elephant problem, Bordeaux doesn't have an elephant problem. So I got this elephant problem. I don't know what I'm going to do about it, by the way. As near as I can tell, I'm the only guy in the world with an elephant problem.
Well, that's another good selling gimmick. You could basically put an elephant on the bottle.
We thought about that, actually, and I actually think it's an interesting take on the elephant in the room, the elephant in the vineyard.
Perfect.
Is a cool story. Now that vineyard's pretty young, so I don't know if it's going to work or not yet. But if it does, I'm going to try to figure out a way to wrap the elephant narrative into it, because I think it's a cool narrative that nobody else has.
Like, maybe even donate to the local elephant refuge if there is one, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. Proceeds from every bottle go to supporting.
People love elephants. My 2-year-old son, the first animal he figured out how to do was he basically lifts his hand up. So
yeah, elephants are cool, and elephants are smart as shit too. What would be awesome would be if this works and we end up being able to develop out this region of the country. It would be awesome to imagine photos of like vineyards with elephants in the vineyards. I mean, come on, that'd make a hell of a poster.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And then you could say, this is extreme, but using the elephant's excrement as fertilizer. I don't know. That's crazy.
Oh no, for sure. And this is where we get into some geeky technical viticulture stuff. So manure, certain types of manure, particularly like chicken and duck manure, has a high percentage of nitrogen, which is really, really good for wine grapes. So I have not done a detailed fecal analysis of elephant manure, but to your point, like it could be like a really potent source of stuff that the vines could greatly benefit from, which makes it even cooler, right?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, what other winery is elephant adjacent? Like, I mean, that doesn't really seem like a thing. So you've got all this like your own winery, your own. How do you make time for your professor at SoCal and just all these things you're doing? Like, how do you manage that? What's your technique?
So a couple things. One is I talked a little bit about my divorce. I have 3 kids, and at the time I was a single dad, and I had kids in different schools and doing different stuff. And so for about a decade, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and would work, and then go do kid stuff, and then work a little bit more, and then I would feed the kids and showers and baths or whatever, and then I would stay up late and work. And so I did that for about a decade, purely as a survival mechanism. And then once the kids aged out, all of a sudden I had capacity galore because I had trained my body to operate like this. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is I am a biphasic sleeper. Do you know about biphasic sleep?
Is that the 4-hour segments split apart?
Yeah.
That's what presidents usually do, right? Because they have to basically, especially if there's Middle East problems, they basically have to wake up when operations are going on at like 1 or 2 a.m. But that's how you operate?
That's how I operate. And so biphasic is actually less, I mean, yes, you can do it as a condition of your environment, but it's more that genetically you are predisposed to certain sleep patterns. Biphasic sleep is like an ancient tribal
nomadics, I would imagine, right? Because they can't stay in the same place. They have to keep moving. Is that kind of?
Yeah. Well, I think it was more like you would, the sun would go down in the tribe, and then everyone like catches a few hours of sleep, and then you're up because someone's got to like watch the village and make sure that the nocturnal predators don't come in, and then you grab a couple more hours, right when the sun starts to come up. So it's a totally normal tribal form of sleeping that some people are genetically predisposed to. And so once I figured this out, like initially I was like, I'm up in the middle of the night, this is bullshit, I'm like rolling around, I can't sleep. Once I figured it out and like, oh, this is actually a superpower, channel it. So what'll happen is I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and then I'll work for 3 hours. This is usually when I do like a lot of my writing. It's in the middle of the night, and then I grab a couple more hours of sleep, at 5 a.m. and then I'm ready to go for the day. So I can slap in an extra 3 hours of work a day because of my biphasic sleep patterns.
What happens when you hit like a meeting you have to get to, and it just keeps on adding on and adding on? What happens then?
Well, that happens all the time, actually. I definitely accumulate sleep debt, and part of it is because I'm in time zones all around the world constantly. But typically what will happen is about day 10, I need to just shut down for a day.
And basically kind of catch up.
Yep, and I'll usually sleep like about 10 hours, and then I'll kind of lay on the couch and do a lot of nothing and just kind of reset the body clock.
But it seems like when you add it all up, you're still getting a lot more in the end, like out of those 10 days.
Totally. And also for me, I think, like, I don't want, like, routine drives me crazy. Like, I don't want routine. I want this life that's just every day is interesting and we'll see what the fuck happens, right? And so the price of that is occasionally you burn the candle a little too thin at both ends, and you need to go kind of decompress. And I've been doing this for long enough that I kind of know, and I know my body, and I know when it needs to reset. And I'll tell my girlfriend, I'll be like, baby, I'm shutting down today. Like, leave me alone, keep the dogs away from me, don't bother me. I'm just gonna veg. So there's one question I like to end the podcast with. That's kind of like my full circle question. And it's a two-part question. And please take your time to think about it. What is something that your parents did that you like to pass on to your kids? And then the other part is, what is something that you try to do differently that your parents did? Wow. That's deep. Well, so I think one of the things that was very beneficial for me growing up is that my parents, and my mother in particular, was very against television. And so she has never had a television in her house. To this day, does not have a television in the house. And so growing up, I had to find ways to entertain myself. And I had sisters, no brothers. And so they were less interested in doing the shit that I was interested in. And so because of that, I read. And I read, to this day, I probably read 4 to 5 books a week. And I think that's a little bit of a superpower. And I read everything from fiction to nonfiction to historical stuff. Anything that's in a book form, I'm going to check it out and see if at any point in time, I have 4 or 5 books that I'm in various stages of, and I read very, very fast. And so that has given me a lot of advantages. And if I could pass one thing on to my children, it would be this idea of just go read a fucking book and see what happens. So I think that's been super beneficial. What would I not do? I think growing up, my parents were very focused on what I'll call the recipe. And I'll tell you what the recipe is. The recipe is you go to high school, you study, you get really good grades, and that gives you the opportunity to get into a good college, and you go to that college and you get really good grades, and that gives you the opportunity to have a job. And then that job gives you the ability to immediately get married and, get the house in the suburbs and this fucking recipe. And if you deviated from the recipe, like, that's bad. Well, I was a punk rock skate kid. Like, I could care less about high school. I could care less about. I didn't even start college until I was 23 years old. I graduated borderline last in my class of high school. Matter of fact, it was so bad. I graduated like 392nd in a class of 408. I wasn't quite at the bottom, but I was pretty damn close. And the principal made me sit next to him at graduation, and I put a DMZ of empty seats around us because they were afraid I was going to act out, which I would have, for sure. Now, my sisters were valedictorians and salutatorians and fucking whatever. They got lauded for their academic efforts. I had an amazing time in high school, and I think I learned a lot of life skills that I apply today by not following the recipe. And I also make enormous more money than all of my sisters put together who follow the recipe, right? So this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think what would I not do is, I think it's this acknowledgement that everybody gets to walk their own path, and to force a child into a path that is not what they're destined to walk on is not a recipe for long-term success. It's a recipe for a problem later. And I sort of battered my way into it, but I refused to bend to the whims of the recipe, and it worked out okay. So that's probably what I wouldn't do. And that's what I've done with my kids too, by the way. It's like, hey, look, this is your life. It's not my life. You get to figure it out. And by the way, you're going to figure it out for the next 80 years. You're going to be figuring shit out. That's fine. So I'll support you. I'll be there to pick you up when you fall down. Go out, make a bunch of mistakes, and figure out what your path is, and recognize it's going to be different than your sister and your brother and whatever. So long-winded answer, but fuck the recipe.
It was great. I loved it. A little touch of your experience, and you had a good negative and positive without even thinking of it for long. So that was great.
Well, what's funny is like I've done a lot of these podcasts, and usually you get asked about, oh, tell me a story about this and that, but that's actually a pretty deep question. So I got to give you mad props for asking them, because it did force me to step back and think a little bit.
I've been using it for a while, and the funny thing is, I really haven't gotten the same answer from a lot of people.
I'll tell you another quick story. When I was in like third grade, we didn't have a television, and so I'm at school and you're trying to connect to the other kids, and there was a new TV show out called The Dukes of Hazzard, and all the kids at school were talking about the Dukes of Hazzard, and so I was like, oh yeah, like I'm not weird, like I know about that, blah blah blah. So fast forward like 10 years, and I'm at somebody's house and the Dukes of Hazzard come on, and I start watching this show, and in my head, what I knew about Dukes is that they were royalty in England. And so I thought that this television show, the whole time for like 10 years, I thought that this television show was about royalty in England. Turns out it's not. Turns out it's not about that at all. And I figured this out. And I remember like I was in high school and I was sitting at my friend's house. I'm like, holy shit, like this isn't about royalty? And they're like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like why would it be about royalty? I'm like, Dukes, like Dukes and you go, no. But in retrospect, while they were learning about the Dukes of Hazzard, I was reading a ton of stuff. And so net on the back end, it's a superpower today, but it sucked at the time. So
yeah, it's crazy how most of that stuff, I guess up until you're, I don't know, you could change it from 18 to 35 or 40, that things change basically where you are.
Well, and as you were finding out with a 2-year-old, there's no manual for how to parent, and you do the best you can and you hope it works out. But yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. I had during the pandemic last Christmas, my parents called me up and like, hey, can we take you to dinner for Christmas? I go, yeah, sure. So I go to dinner with them, and my mom immediately starts in with like, oh, remember what a piece of shit kid you were in high school, you didn't pay attention. And I go, mom, wait a minute. Like, that's your narrative. My narrative is that like I had an amazing time in high school. I made amazing friends, and I learned life skills that I use literally on a daily basis today. And I'm by whatever metric you want to measure, I'm successful. And so like, isn't that what high school is all about? And she was like, yeah, but you did it wrong. And I'm like, oh, okay. I think I did it right for me.
Well, that was great, sir.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Is there anything you want to plug besides the book, the podcast, obviously the 2024 Bhutan winery?
Yeah, if anyone wants to come to Bhutan, come check it out. So yeah, I guess if your listeners are at all interested in learning about wine in a sort of non-threatening way with a lot of F-bombs, they can go to drinkingandknowingthings.com and they can sign up for my wine newsletter. It'll be an easy way for them to become much more knowledgeable and confident about wine without doing any work whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
There's links to all my books there. If people are interested in learning about the Bhutan Wine Company and what's going on with that, bhutanwine.com, and the rum company, SoCal Rum, SoCalRum.com. And if people want to touch base with me for business purposes, they can reach me on LinkedIn, Michael Juergens. Just Google Michael Juergens, and I'll be at the top of the list. Although there is a football player for the Carolina Panthers who has the same name as me, spelled the same way, which is very interesting.
Is there I guess a social platform that you prefer that people can follow you on?
I mean, I'm an old guy, right? Like, so I'm not good with that shit, but I am on Instagram at Drinking and Knowing. And I usually post like wine stuff up on there.
Okay.
And occasionally other photos of dumb shit that I'm doing, like whatever that happens to be. But they certainly welcome to follow me there. And I'm on Twitter from a business perspective at Michael_Juergens. So lots of ways to get in touch with me. And I truly I welcome anybody who wants to engage in a discussion with me on topics that are interesting to me and are, where people have things to say. Like I love hearing from people, and if you send me an email or a DM, odds are I'm going to respond. Michael, I appreciate you letting me come on and be more interesting than you for an hour or so.
It wasn't hard, I'll tell you that, sir. I think you had me in the first couple of minutes. So,
well, thanks again for having me on, and look forward to coming back on in 2024 and drinking some Bhutan wine with you.
Sounds good, sir.
Cheers.
If you like this week's episode of People More Interesting Than Me, please follow me on Apple Podcasts so you won't miss out on more episodes like these.